Hey everybody, it's Carm here. I'm coming back on a Sunday morning. Back on to share more Tangerine Dream collection. Thank you everyone so much who watched and commented on the first video. Yeah, it was much more than I would have ever anticipated. It was quite a long video, and yeah, I really appreciate it. It's very encouraging. Yeah, I mean, they're all my all-time favorite band. For those who didn't see the first video. Been into them since I was 15, and it's never stopped exploring them. So I wanted to give them their due course time-wise, because yeah, they're just I just wanted to do them hopefully a semblance of justice, and yeah, I want to share for those who aren't as familiar, or those who already are. You could revisit your own further. So what I wanted to do here, yeah, again, if you hadn't seen the first video, I showed the LPs that I have of the group. And here I'm continuing on with CDs, and I have quite a bit in this format, so I've decided to divide it up further into kind of different segments. Here I just want to do, I guess, what could be called standalone studio albums. Later on they did, well, a series of series, like Dream Mixes, a Seasons series of the cycles. What was another one? Sonic Poem series. So I'll have those separate, as well as live albums and compilations and things. But yeah, I'll just concentrate on standalone studio albums here. And the first several here, of course, I already showed in the LP video. So I'll still give a little bit of a synopsis of each in case you hadn't seen that one. So yeah, starting right in at the beginning. And you have Electronic Meditation. Debut from '69. It's on reissued on Relativity. Yeah, highly experimental, not giving much of an indication of what was to come. Yeah, very psychedelic, noisy, experimental, using found objects as well as more conventional instruments. Highly atmospheric, but also unsettling at times. But didn't have the steady state feel of later albums, but yeah, very well worth hearing for a completely different side of them, where it started. Alpha Centauri, 1971. The lineup change and going into quite a different direction, very much going out into space, still retaining some of that kind of earlier kind of psychedelic flavor, a little bit of rock, you hear a little bit of jazz there with the drumming, tribal even at times sounding, but also going into some deep internal landscapes as well as external heavy stuff. Yeah, I remember getting this as a Christmas gift, and yeah, quite a blend with that season. But yeah, Alpha Centauri. Next up, all-time favorite here, 1972, Zeit. I'd remembered I'd done a video on this some years ago. So just love this one so much. It's such a singular album, and really timeless. I think it sounds to me just as good now. Again, has that kind of static, organic, and spacious quality. Dark, heavy. Just amazing stuff here. This is a 2-disc set, which has live archive of the time. Klangwald performance, November 1972. Nice long pieces. Love that. Perfect for Halloween. Of course, coming up right around the corner. Very dark, scary at times. I mean, you play it late at night, lights off. Oh yeah, especially around that season. There's some sounds on there that are almost like a theremin going throughout. At the time, the electronics, especially on stage, very raw, very experimental, improvisation. I think it was entirely improvised, just playing off of each other and allowing it to unfold gradually. But yeah, I couldn't recommend this enough. This album as a whole, but if you find this version too with the live stuff on there, incredible. So yeah, Zeit. Next up, Atem, 1973. Here a little bit of a continuation from Zeit, although going into other territory, almost harking back a little bit acoustically, sounding, it's earthbound, but earthbound, or you could say planet-bound, coming down from space, going, these kind of jungle sounds, birds, and but more darker and foreboding. Lots of mellotron is being introduced on here, which is really it's among my favorite instruments, and it just oozes out through the album. The lineup at the time. Froza, Franca, and Bauman. Now this is also a 2-disc set, which has a live performance from November '73, so a year later than from the previous one. And a similar feel, very dark and haunting, experimental, maybe even a little noisy at times, but also, real good representation of what they were doing then. Always nice to hear more of those. So yeah, Atem. Oh, here's a reissue on Jive Electro. They had done their first 4 albums all in this kind of pattern, different colors. I forget all the colors. I just have this one. This is actually the first version of Atem I ever had on CD. Nice portrait of them at the time. Yeah, recorded late '72, early '73. And next up, Phaedra. Recorded late '73, came out in '74. First album for Virgin. Still experimental, though you could definitely hear the change in the music. Adding the sequencer, a whole other dimension rhythmically and texturally. Very much like the cover, like a winterscape. Just very expansive and and very pioneering, influential on so many people. You can only imagine what it was like hearing it at the time if you hadn't heard much electronic music. It's been just galvanizing, and it was for me. And it was, I heard it 20 years after it came out. Yeah, Phaedra. Here, Rubicon. Continuing on from Phaedra, but more, more developed, more evolved, a little bit refined, still experimental, and delving deeper into the sequencer. Yeah, I always love this back cover just as well. We have it as a poster. Yep. So this is a Tangerine Dream Definitive Edition Virgin. So, Rubicon. Stratosphere from '76. Further on melodically, developing a little more of an accessible sound, a little bit easier to get into as far as melody and harmony. A little bit more conventional instrumentation, but still has that sense of depth and mystery that it always had. So yeah, excellent. Cyclone, 1978. Big change here with Peter Bauman leaving, Steve Jolliffe joining, adding lyrics and vocals and lyrics for the first time. A little hard to get into initially, based on everything that had come previously, but for me personally, definitely it grew on me much further over the years, and it's a very singular statement in their catalog. And just love this artwork. Edgar, is an incredible visual artist as well as a musician, and his wife Monique or Monica, photographer. So, yeah, Cyclone. Force Majeure. I mentioned Klaus Krieger was also on the previous album on drums. Steve Jolliffe leaves for this one in 1979. Again, further developments melodically, harmonically, a little more accessible. Still has that kind of trademark sound, sequencer based, and still experimenting. The end of the decade here. Force Majeure. moving on to 1981, Exit, getting more into the digital realm, Synclavier and what was coming out at the time. Has a kind of dark feel to it, but of course you have shorter cuts here. It's starting to do soundtracks at the time, and you can kind of hear that infiltrating the music. It does have a cinematic feel to it throughout. And again, for some reason, this has been a favorite summertime album of mine for many, many years, even though it doesn't necessarily evoke summer on the surface. Okay, Exit. A White Eagle, 82. Continuing on further into the digital realm, really exploring the potential of those instruments, and again, always exploring. Technologically, they were always pretty much right up on what was coming out at the time, and just exploring it in their own distinctive ways. At the time, still doing side-long cuts, at least one, several shorter ones. Oh, I didn't mention too that, I might have mentioned in the previous video, in 1980, Johannes Schmeling came into the group and became part of the core for the next several years, adding a certain melodicism and romanticism to the music, and definitely opened things up quite a bit. So yeah, White Eagle. Hyperborea, 1983. And continue on with those same developments and the same lineup. An album that really I warmed up to more over the years. Didn't like it as much initially for quite some time, but took the CD on a car ride somewhere, but just probably just running errands, but had a nice long drive, and it all kind of hit me at once. It's like, this is really good traveling music. And again, you have 3 shorter cuts and a longer side-long cut here. Yeah, Hyperborea. Next up, going somewhat out of sequence. This is released later in the decade, although, well, actually, I think I am out of sequence here. Oh, pardon me. I think I got it. Okay, this one, La Park. 1985, same lineup, now on a new label. Hyperborea was the last one for Virgin, and now they're on Jive Electro. This is a Castle Music, Sanctuary Records reissue. Now on here it gets even more, you could say, accessible, even pop-like, kind of shorter, say like short instrumental pop tunes, pop rock in a way. Another one it took me a while personally to warm up to. On the surface, some of it sounds like almost like aerobicizing music, but there's really more depth as you go with various pieces. Central Park, Gaudi Park, Zen Garden, Hyde Park. So celebration of the various parks throughout the world. Got a quote here from Buddha. But yeah, it is something I have warmed up to quite a bit over the years, and if you're coming from more of a pop rock orientation, especially if you like a lot of 80s music, this is a good introduction to them. Again, instrumental, but it's definitely it's a good entryway if that's more your thing initially. So yeah, La Park. Okay, I think I got it. I think I got it right now. Yeah, Green Desert. Recorded in 1973 originally, was in the vaults for quite some time, and I think in 1984 Edgar remixed it. Then it came out, I think around that time, or this is a 1986 from Relativity. So yeah, it came out in the mid 80s and had that kind of sheen of the time, which is probably a little more representative of the 80s than the 70s. And would really like to hear what the original sounded like, from way back when. Those original raw tapes. Green Desert. Next up we have Underwater Sunlight. And now at this point, yes, from 86, at this point Johannes Schmeling left the group with a really nice solo career and added Paul Hasslinger. He was a very young man at the time. He was in his early 20s, and that added an interesting, dimension of sound and melodic approach. Beautiful album here, very much themed on kind of an aquatic theme overall. Very melodic, expansive, accessible, though they're getting a little bit back into experimentation to a certain degree, but still very easy to get into. There's a bonus cut on this particular one called Dolphin Smile. But yeah, just a really beautiful album. Another one that would be a good introduction to them. If you're not familiar, you want to find that balance between accessibility and experimentation, from the 80s. And yeah, that's a lovely one. Yeah, Underwater Sunlight. Now this next one, in a similar vein, well, not so much as far as the style, but the concept of Cyclone. We have Tiger. Now this is another one that adds vocals and lyrics, not quite in the expected way, taking the writings of William Blake and setting them to music. The music superficially has that kind of 80s pop feel, but there's more going on than that. And you do hear the distinctive, you'd say almost like a trademark sound throughout. But adding the vocals and the lyrics, definitely is. And another one that really divided people at the time, as far as the fans were concerned, their opinions of the group. You got Edgar, Chris, and Paul, and what was her name? The Jocelyn Bernadette Smith. As you can see, the vocalist here, who I guess initially wasn't entirely keen on the lyrics, singing these lyrics, not being familiar with them, but it's another album that for me, wasn't quite ready for initially. Being so different than what I was familiar with, but it got me familiar with William Blake and curious, and eventually started reading his work, more deeply, getting into it, and it's a very neat concept that I think ultimately does work. You just have to be in the right frame of mind for it if you're, again, more predisposed to what they normally had done. And of course, if you're a fan of William Blake, and you're not familiar with this, definitely should, definitely an alternate version, to say the least, alternate perspective. But yeah, very deep, heavy stuff, metaphysical. But, yeah, Tiger. A bonus track on here called Vigor. You can see the titles here, 21st Century Common Man. That could be a reference to. But, yeah, Tiger. For much different view overall. Next up, okay, now they, at this point, soon after this album, Tiger, 87, Chris Frank left the group. I think it was right after a tour, or I think it might have been during a tour. It was late 1987. Eventually went solo, and they continued on Edgar and Paul as a duo for a while. Signed to a new label called Private Music. Interestingly enough, it brought them back together with Peter Baumann, who was running the label for a while. So it's a different kind of collaboration, and really quite a different sound altogether. Now we have Optical Race. It's like this with the cover. So yeah, this is from 1988. The sound is very, very much ensconced in the digital realm. A very bright, even kind of sharp sound. The music itself is very bright. I think that's one thing. I think after, in my opinion, for a little while, in certain respects after Chris had left the group. It kind of lost a little bit of that dark, mysterioso, exploratory quality. You heard it on certain pieces, but it was definitely going for something more more accessible. Yeah, just brighter overall. You know, again, in terms of the tone of the music, but also the tone that was being set by the music, really kind of went more in that direction. Very very much, again, kind of like instrumental pop. Some really nice stuff still, and again, another one that took me a long time to really appreciate, but you know, from being more into their earlier work, you know, especially from the 70s. Mothers of Rain is a standout piece here. Again, having, you know, more of a depth of feeling, very evocative. I think of traveling through the desert in a way with that one, with like a series of mirages coming along as you're going, and yeah, it's really a beautiful one. Twin Soul Tribe is really nice, and yeah, you have Ghazal, love song. But yeah, if you like the 80s pop sound especially, you'll appreciate this. And if you're not into it, well, maybe just sample it, but it might not be something to go for. But yeah, Optical Race, kind of a new chapter. And they were also calling this the Melrose years, being or not the, I'm sorry, not the Melrose, that came later. The what were they calling it? I forget. Because they had different like different monikers for each era, and it kind of, it kind of varies from place to place. Actually, the Melrose years came later, but yeah, a new chapter beginning here. And next up, from 1989, Lily on the Beach. Kind of a continuation of the previous one. Even more cuts on here, a lot of shorter pieces. This one gets very, very poppy. You could hear it as being like a soundtrack to, I think of it as kind of like those kind of like teen beach movies of the 80s. Just kind of almost like some of the comedies that came out at the time, maybe like somewhat lower budget. I kind of imagine some of that. Also, I think at this point too, the music is increasingly earthbound. It doesn't quite have that expansive. Their music to me has always been about going up and out, taking you out into the imagination and into inner space as well as outer space. This is very much earthbound, and you really, for me, it evokes images of just being on terra firma, kind of everyday things. Not necessarily a bad thing, because it's kind of like an alternative view of that, from going through their lens. But and again, it's very accessible, and especially of being of that time, the late 80s, and again, technologically, they're getting right at the forefront of digital. So yeah, if that's not quite your inclination, it might not be entirely for you, but if it is, it's very well worth looking into. Also introduces a little bit of sax on here, which was an instrument that kind of came and went throughout the rest of their output. I think it was on Long Island Sunset. So that makes it very much kind of more earthbound and somewhat everyday in a sense. But yeah, with Lily on the Beach. And again, with the same lineup of Edgar and Paul. And next up here, still on the same label. Okay, the Melrose years. That's what they were calling it. I couldn't think of what it was during the time they were with Private Music. So yeah, now you have Melrose from 1990. Now we've added a third member, and it's none other than Edgar's son Jerome, who had contributed a little bit compositionally to a little bit earlier on. Born in 1970, played multiple instruments, I think, throughout his life. I think he started out on drums, but also plays keyboards and guitars, and adds something different here. Adding keyboard and guitar on here. This is an album I've kind of gone back and forth with. You could kind of hear how it's a continuation of the previous one. It's a little more subdued, which I kind of like, and it's not quite as obviously in your face with the digital, because some of it gets a little bit, you know, with the drum machines and everything. This is a little bit more, a little subtler, and maybe even more painterly. But the character of it is just a little bit more, I don't know. I don't know if I'd call it anonymous, but it's the distinctive sound of what they were doing was kind of getting a little bit, maybe a little bit whitewashed at the time. But they still had, you know, that sense of exploring the music and what their instruments can do and the interaction between them. Yeah, Edgar, Paul, and Jerome, who at this time was, I think, only about 20 years old. But yeah, further unfolding of the story here, and again another chapter with Jerome becoming a full-fledged member of the band. So yeah, Melrose. Now next up, released the next year, Canyon Dreams. Now they've gone on to a new label called Miramar. Now this is the Seattle years, they're calling it. Yeah. Now this is actually an earlier recording though, from I believe it was from '87, while Chris Franck was still in the group for a soundtrack, video soundtrack, and this is among the earliest things I'd heard of theirs, along with the more experimental things, and probably got a lot of more radio play than a lot of the other albums at the time. Yeah, Shadow Flyer, Water's Gift, some really nice pieces here. Closer to what you could call new age in a sense. Very accessible in that way, but very warm. I think it's one of their warmer albums that were recorded in the '80s. And again, if you kind of shy away from the '80s synthesizers, that technology, this would be a good one to get into. It kind of makes the most of sort of those patches and voicings that aren't so severely digital, and inappropriately enough too, being that it was a film about being in the canyon and the desert and these landscapes. Of course, you want it to sound more organic and appropriate to it. But yeah, this is a really lovely album from that particular lineup of the time. So yeah, Canyon Dreams. And next up, still on Miramar, a Raccoon. Yeah, by now, for the most part, it'll be from here on out for quite some years. It'll be, you can see Edgar and Jerome here as being the core members, and they would have other musicians kind of coming in and out on various albums, as well as touring. And on this one too, it introduces, again, kind of continuing from the previous ones, there's more guitar on the album, played by a few guest guitarists, as well as Edgar and Jerome themselves. And yeah, the synthesizer was always at the core, but the guitar just comes in a little bit more in ways that it hadn't previously, for lead melodies and textures. And again, one could weigh, how much it contributed to the music or possibly detracted as far as the originality. If it becoming more guitar-centric, they kind of lost a little bit of their kind of a distinctive approach with the synthesizer that had always kind of held it together, and it was kind of the bed that they traveled on, throughout their playing. But it's a nice, as far as like an alternate view of kind of what they were doing. Part of it as their story was unfolding, hearing how they integrated it was interesting. And again, this is one of those albums that I go to quite a bit, even though it's not at the core of my favorites, but there's just something about it. So yeah, Raccoon, recorded late '91, early '92. Again on Miramar. Well, here's a single, Raccoon. You have Raccoon Special Radio Edit, Oriental Haze, which wasn't on the album. Oh, and you have Linda Spa, who was introduced into that group at the time. Woodwinds, keyboards, very good musician, someone who was on and played with them on and off, really throughout, even into the 2000s, even into the early teens. And you have a really nice interview here with Edgar. You got 14 and a half minutes. speaking about this album and just kind of a little retrospective of the career up to that point. So it's nice just for that alone. So yeah, you have to look for this Raccoon special edition, the bonus track and special interview. So yeah. And next up, Quinoa. It was recorded in '92 and was reissued later in the decade. This one's a little different than what they were doing at that time, going into the '90s, harking back a little bit earlier music from the '70s and '80s. A little bit of sequencer, but also a little more subdued. Not as much electronic percussion, which they're doing a lot of at the time with drum machines and kind of marking the period. But this is a little more expansive and kind of going back into earlier territory. And again, you got a much longer piece here, which they weren't doing quite as much of at this time. So it's kind of a nice, refreshing departure for a little while. I think this is primarily Edgar and Jerome, just the two of them on here for the most part. So yeah, Quinoa. And next up, continuing with Seattle Years, Turn of the Tides from '94. I think it was recorded in '92 and '93. And same lineup. You have, of course, Edgar and Jerome and Linda Spa. And they added a guitarist, the guitarist who became pretty much a mainstay for a little while, a few years. Zlatko Perica, I think is how you pronounce it. Very good on electric and acoustic guitar. Very technically, able. Added a certain, I guess you could say, is comparable to someone like, say, like Eddie Van Halen or Steve Vai, or kind of in that style to some degree. Maybe not the most subtle as far as expressing, but added something different. Again, had more of like a pop rock approach, really emphasizing more rock, with the guitar being a little more at the forefront. So maybe not distinctive in the same way, but again, just another kind of accessibility. Like these kind of photographs here. They do a version of Pictures at an Exhibition by Mussorgsky, which is kind of interesting, and Death of a Nightingale, Jungle Journey. Again, still very cinematic, as they were doing a lot of soundtracks, all through these years. But it's just it's another interesting snapshot of the time and kind of what they were developing through. So yeah, and I think they had a tour around this time, or I think around '92, 93. And that's actually when I first heard of them, was in the early '90s, and I think it was actually just before this came out. Starting to really pick up steam as far as getting into the releases. Although I didn't get into the '90s stuff of this period until later on, further into the decade. So yeah, Turn of the Tides. Next up here, Tyranny of Beauty from '95. Continuing on from that style, a lot of guitar still, integrated with the synthesizers. Getting a little more into the electronic that was current at the time. You can say like techno to some degree, at least touching on it. Other albums they went much further into it, but this is, you could kind of hear it being introduced into the mix a little bit more. Especially on the first cut, Catwalk, which really does kind of sound like that. You imagine, they're going down the runway, and it's got the kind of atmosphere to it. Maybe a little bit darker and surreal version of that. And you could hear a little bit of that too. Another thing about their music is there was always a surrealist component, being that Edgar himself had studied and befriended Salvador Dali, and that was always part of their music. I think they also kind of lost some of that surrealism during the 80s and early 90s, though this seemed to get a little bit of that back at times, just in subtle ways. But yeah, so very at that time, mid '90s. They also do a version of Stratosphere, kind of re-recorded a reapproached version, and but yeah, that's a good example of what they were doing, developing a little further into something that was a little more timely of then, but just another kind of interesting chapter there. And again, with the core of the group at the time, Edgar, Jerome, and Linda Spa and Zlatko. Tyranny of Beauty. And next up, Goblins Club, in 1996. I think this is the first album I ever bought of theirs, new, which was current at the time, and actually I liked it right away. Now this is a further development from Tyranny of Beauty, starting to get a little more expansive again, exploratory. You could hear a little bit of those influences of dance music of that time, electronic dance music. But also hear a little bit more ethnic influence, and at times they even brought in a choir, just varying the colors and the textures more. This feels like they're going a little bit, they're lifting off the ground a little bit again, and exploring other realms, going a little deeper and further out. Yeah, you have Jerome, Edgar, and Linda here. Yeah, it's a pretty, it's a nice one. It's one that I've enjoyed more and more over the years. Another one to be a good introduction to their 90s work, if you want to get a sense of it being accessible, but also exploring a little more, and get a little bit more of that kind of distinctive sound and approach, back at that time. So yeah, at Goblins Club from 1996. Oh yeah, and didn't mention too by then, I think that was their last proper album on Miramar. So now they're on, they got Castle here, Sequel Records. So yeah, the Goblins Club. And next up, now there's a little bit of gaps in the collection. I mean, I don't have nearly all their albums, quite a bit, but so there's a gap of a few years here. So that was from '96. This one's from 2000. The Seven Letters from Tibet. To me, one of their most gorgeous albums. Very much music of the heart. Very much, from the heart. Very melodic, poignant at times. And it's just Edgar and Jerome on synthesizers. Didn't hear any guitars on here, no drum machines. Just very beautiful, melodic. Their choice of sounds too is a little more pared down, maybe a little more narrowly focused. But I think for this, it's all the better for that. Just very beautiful and expansive. There's a certain color and feel to this that I'd never heard on previous albums before. Just allowing the music to really unfold gradually. And again, they're definitely, you could say, kind of off the ground with this one. Very expansive, going through the clouds, not in a spacious way, or not spacey, but more of a genuinely exploratory and curious way, but still very much from the heart. The whole thing is just really beautiful. Highly recommend this in one of their more calming albums, more soothing, kind of a lower, slower tempo. But just absolutely gorgeous. I'd say it's almost comparable to, at least in tone and feel, to Tangram, which is another favorite, which was done 20 years earlier. Maybe in some sense this could be, maybe just in my own way of feeling about it, it could be almost like a sequel to it, or just an extension of it in a sense. But highly recommended, again, for kind of a quieter, more subdued, but still, again, regaining that real depth of feel in their music and of expressiveness. Yeah, Seven Letters from Tibet, it's just gorgeous. Very much recommended, from 2000. Next up, jumping ahead a few years again, 2005. Another one I highly recommend. Gina d'Arc. And on here you're introducing some more musicians. Should have opened this up beforehand. But this is really beautiful, and something I didn't get into till much later. So you have Edgar, you have Iris Kama, who plays percussion, Jerome himself, Torsten Quaishning, who figured into the group for, well, up until the present day on keyboards, and Linda Spa is back for this. We played a lot with them in the 90s. A very long album too, getting close to 80 minutes actually. Another one that's just very beautiful. Lots of variety here, gradually unfolding, but also a nice mixture of styles and pacing. You could hear little bits of other kind of music coming in that really couldn't even define, that they really hadn't explored before. Just the way they weave the themes together is just very, it's very gradual and subtle, but just beautiful all around. Yeah, and again, for being a longer album, they're able to stretch out more in ways that they hadn't. A lot of the 90s albums had this kind of short, compact feel with the songs. Again, more of that kind of pop rock structure, but here they're really stretching out and, again, kind of harking back to the earlier days, but not recreating them, really creating something new and fresh. And to me, it still sounds fantastic now. Yeah, it's another one that's very highly recommended. For those who, I know some people think they kind of ended in the late 70s, early 80s, but I always felt that they, even with the albums that didn't quite make it or may not have been quite to your taste, keep exploring what they did later on as a group, because this is another example of something that's, to me, it's just a very good representation of even their overall history, even going well into the 2000s. So yeah, Jeanne d'Arc, yeah, excellent. And next up here, something that Edgar had done over the years, remixing, remastering older works. He had done that with his own catalog as well as various Tangerine Dream releases. And here we have a reworking of Phaedra. Yeah, Phaedra Revisited. And this is just, Edgar's playing this all himself. I think this originally came out in 2005. It's a 2010 reissue. So he's playing it pretty much, note by note as much as possible. Of course, adding different tones and textures of the time. Updating the sound tech-wise. I like it overall. The title cut, of course, was known for introducing the sequencer as being a real, you could say, kind of a fulcrum, or kind of tying it all together. He kind of replaces that with these digital drums, which for me don't quite, I don't know, maybe a little bit heavy-handed as far as approaching that piece. But overall, though, the album does a really nice job of kind of going back, and it's a nice revisiting overall. And there's a bonus cut on here called Delphi, kind of done in the style of the original, style and spirit of the original. But yeah, it's worth hearing if you're by comparing to with the original. And yeah, so you have Phaedra Revisited. Next up, for me, another real high point, and one of their lesser-known albums. Didn't get an official release until much later, though this was recorded in 1988. Blue Dawn. This is a project between Edgar and a fellow named Ralph Waitful. Now in 1988, Chris had left the group, Chris Franca. It was just him and Paul Haslinger. Well, for the 1988 tour, they added Ralph as a third member for the tour, and during the tour and a little bit after, they were kind of working on some ideas together, and this was the result. And to me, it's quite different than anything they had done really ever, in a sense. Especially another real standout for that time in the 80s. Doesn't sound very 80s. even with the electronic percussion at times and the tones and timbres they're using. Highly melodic, beautiful interplay between the two of them. Here's some guitar on here too, but just a really gorgeous album, very expansive, going deeper, just as far as what the music evokes and the feeling, the real feeling of the music, the emotion. Some of the other stuff at the time was a little bit surfacey, a little more earthbound in more of a typical way, in a sense, more kind of shooting for accessibility, whereas this is more expressive and really trying to explore something together. Just a really beautiful one. And again, it's rather hard to find, but if you could hear it somewhere, or you do run across a copy, highly recommended. Excuse me, a real standout for that time in the late 80s. See a Blue Dawn from Edgar Froese and Ralph Waitful. Okay, next up, this is, by the way, this is released in 2006. Now next up, jumping ahead quite a bit, and the sound is, again, kind of harking back to the approach taken on Cyclone and Tiger, adding vocals and lyrics for this one. And upon revisiting this, I'm enjoying this more than I ever have. So you have the core lineup of the time. This is 2006 or 2007, and adding a vocalist named Christian Hausel, also plays rhythm guitar. Now they're taking most of the music was written by the group, Edgar and others in the group. The lyrics are by various poets, writers and other poets. Yeah, you're back with some William Blake, Sir Philip Sidney, Thomas Stanley, Walt Whitman, George Herbert, Ralph Waldo Emerson, all set to music. The vocalist, Christian, pretty distinctive style. I really like his voice. At times it kind of reminds me a little bit of David Sylvian, with far less vibrato, and maybe even what little I don't know a whole lot about U2, but Bono. You could hear a little bit of that feel to me. The approach he takes in his singing, and even the timbre of his voice at times, very well suited to the music, which really is, you hear their signature style at times, more accessible, a little more of a pop rock approach. You could say at times introducing maybe a little bit of what you can call new wave, and even dream pop, which seems appropriate enough, but really, really nicely done. And again, you're doing great justice to the lyrics too. The voice is perfect for it, and it's just a really nice fit. So if you like, you like poetry, you like even what you can call singer-songwriter, this is another really interesting approach from the group, and adding a vocalist. And the instrumentation overall is really interesting. In addition to the electronics, Edgar plays a little bit of blues harmonica, which is I don't think they'd played that since Stratosphere. Played a little bit on there. You have a little bit of steel drums, not done in the typical way though. More coloristic, but very, very interesting. A little bit of Irish influence. You have the bouzouki and the bodhran, and you have a little modified bagpipe. So yeah, very, very interesting, and again, another one very much recommended. You're coming more from a pop rock perspective. Yeah, it's another excellent approach here. See, my battery's getting a little low. I thought I charged it. Go a little bit quicker. And next up we have Kyoto. Kind of similar with the Blue Dawn, or even harking back to Green Desert, something that was recorded quite some time ago but didn't come out until later. And this one was remixed and remastered. Now this is a collaboration between Edgar and Johannes Schmeling from when they were on the 1983 tour, doing a little something together. Recorded in '83, and this came out in, I think, 2005. Pretty nice. Again, it would have been nice to hear what the original tapes it sounded like, kind of unfettered. But this is, it's highly melodic and rhythmic. You could hear a little bit of what they were doing at the time. I think the proper studio album that was out then was Hyperborea. You could hear a little bit of that there, being that it was remixed and some added layers, I think by both artists, as more of a modern, kind of techno-ish feel at times. You could hear those dance beats coming in, but done quite nicely, and a lot more, a lot of variety to it. So yeah, it's very, very interesting approach they took. Would have been interesting too if they had maybe like a double disc set, for have the original and then compare and contrast. But yeah, another interesting chapter to the story, and or you could say something that was something that was in the vault. Didn't know about until later. You have Johannes there. Johannes and Edgar on tour. So yeah, Kyoto. Next up we have Mars Mission Counter. Came from, I think, now this is from, there was an album called Mars Polaris, which is kind of a reworked version on the theme of space exploration. And I think this one's done primarily, I think the original was Edgar and Jerome. I think Edgar is just doing this one. That composed and performed by Edgar Froza. Again, another one that, kind of going back literally and figuratively back out into space, no longer earthbound. Nice melodic and rhythmic, very cinematic, as you would expect. Yeah, this is one I'll have to revisit more, because it's been a little while. But yeah, basically taking like the themes of the original Mars Polaris and kind of rearranging them a little bit, taking a fresh approach to them. But yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, I think this one came out in 07, I believe, 07, 08. Yeah, Mars Mission Counter. And next up, we're getting into some of the reworked albums here. Edgar was doing at the time, during the 2000s, Tangram, 2008. Tangram originally was two long, side-long cuts, and now he divides them up, more into segments here. It stays true to the original, although it adds a lot of, I guess what would be modern at the time, dance beats and things. I enjoy it, although it does kind of send me towards the original. Definitely more of a kind of a dance club kind of feel to it. Again, if you want the subtle and beauty of the original, definitely go for the original. But it's nice, interesting hearing an alternate version here. I know they played this a lot live during that time, because they were touring an awful lot into the late 2000s and into the teens. So this figured into it quite a bit. Yeah, Tangram 2008. Next up we have Hyperborea 2008. This one I'd say stays even more true to the original from '83. Kind of beefing up the sound a little more. It's a fuller sound and adding a little bit more textures and layers overall, electronically. But still quite nice. Give you a little synopsis there. Yeah, and Edgar plays all this himself. Just reworked it note for note, pretty painstakingly. But, yeah, it's an another interesting version of an older work here. Okay, now we're coming to another personal favorite. I think a real high point in their overall story. Machu Picchu. I think originally recorded in 04 or 05, didn't come out until much later. Dedicated to John Peel, the radio DJ and journalist who really kind of helped put Tangerine Dream on the map. I think he had picked Atem as his import of the year for 1973, and just did a lot to kind of helped him get wider exposure. He had passed in, I think it was in '04, in Peru, so hence Machu Picchu. And this was Edgar's dedication to him, something that was in the vaults for quite some time. His wife, new wife Bianca, had encouraged him. You know, you really need to release this. It's incredible stuff here, and you want to get this out here. This dedication, and it's just beautiful, heartfelt, exploratory, quite sequencer based. Bringing that back in, harking back to the earlier music, but still very fresh, very new. Middle piece here, Adios e Cusca, the third one, Cusco. To me, brings to mind Mike Oldfield, what he was doing in the mid-'70s, as far as what he was doing harmony-wise. Just to me, it has that feel to it, just the way it builds and develops. Just very beautiful, deep music here, pretty much all on synthesizer. Yeah, just the twists and turns that the music takes. Again, it's another one that's very much from the heart without sounding too, syrupy or saccharine. But yeah, just a beautiful balance there. Wonderful energy throughout, and just another, I think, a high point here. And again, performed by Edgar himself, which again he did a lot of during that decade, where basically recorded under the name Tangerine Dream, just solo. But this is another one I couldn't recommend highly enough. Machu Picchu, Tangerine Dream, Edgar playing everything. Yeah, this is beautiful, beautiful stuff here. One Night in Africa, 2013, 2014. Yeah, another one, kind of more thematic albums. Focusing on Africa. And I think this one might be played by the whole group. I'm not quite sure. Oh, composed and produced by Edgar. I think he might have had a little bit of help from the group too. Because I know he collaborated with Torsten a lot on the albums. Another one, really nice, expansive, melodically and rhythmically. Yeah, very much like the covers. You're definitely going up and out into the music. And a lot of stuff here that was performed live. Again, exploring the modern sounds of the time. Again, always staying up on the current, not so much trends, but the actual, technical-wise, whatever was new in synthesizer technology, and just really using it to the utmost, expressively. It's another beautiful one, very evocative, and yeah, just again showing that even well into the 2000s, they really got their exploratory quality back overall, and yeah, it's beautiful stuff. One Night in Africa, Cruise to Destiny in 2014. What I understand here is they were supposed to do a current group at the time. They were supposed to do a tour, or not a tour, like an actual gig on a cruise ship. But Edgar had a severe fall, and that curtailed that. I don't think they were ever able to go on that. But this is the music that they made, kind of in the spirit of what it would have been like on that tour, or on that ship. Sounds like it was maybe done live in the studio, and covering a lot of earlier pieces here. You can see pieces from Sorcerer, quite a few things from the private music years, or the Melrose years. Yeah, CAT Scan, Sungate, kind of going back, harking back to those. So yeah, still very, very worth hearing them do older pieces from the newer perspective on here. So it's a different approach. Yeah, Cruise to Destiny, Topographic Dreamtime. And now jumping ahead a little bit to 2014, or jumping ahead as far as the lineup change. Of course, you still had Edgar in the group, Torsten Queichning. Now we've added Ulrich Schnaus, wonderful solo artist in his own right, who I very much recommend if you're not familiar, and Hoshiko Yamane, playing violin and electronics. And we have Malakunia which was supposed to well, signal a new era, the first release of the quantum years, getting into different synthesizers, different textures, but also compositionally and really evocatively and emotionally. There was a new depth to the group, definitely from Hoshiko and Ulrich's, adding to the group, and you could definitely hear Ulrich's his own sense, texturally and compositionally in the group. Very highly emotional, wonderful energy throughout. Just the way it builds, and the chord sequences are very, they just grab you, And this is considered a cup disc, kind of like an EP, although it's a longer running time. Beautiful stuff here, hearing this new era, which sadly with Edgar wasn't to last very long. They were only able to do a little bit together, before he passed on in January of 2015. But this is excellent. Beautiful stuff on here. And again, adding, showing another dimension to the group, and as they were carrying on. So, yeah, Mala Kunia. And now next up, we're jumping ahead. After Edgar had passed, the remaining members kept going on. Torsten, Hoshiko, and Ulrich. We have Particles. It's actually a mixture of studio and a little bit of live stuff. Nice double disc set here. Yeah, starting in, we have 4 p.m. session, a long improvisation, very much harking back to kind of the days of Rubicon and Ricochet with the sequencer. Beautiful the way it unfolds. You have the Stranger Things main theme from the show. Great show if you haven't seen it, by the way. And of course, they who'd made that music were very much influenced by Tangerine Dream. So it was kind of the closing the circle with this particular covering here. A great rendition. And Rubicon itself, adding another dimension to it with their own distinctive approaches and the technology of this time, of 2016. Very good hearing that version. And you have some live pieces here from mostly earlier. Yeah, Mothers of Rain, one of my favorite pieces of that time in the 80s. Yeah, White Eagle, Dolphin Dance. Yeah, excellent. And yeah, they were carrying on as a group after Edgar left, and still doing it now. So yeah, Particles. Next up, another cup disc, EP, Light Flux. Newer music as well as some stuff that was in the vault. Yeah, and, loving memory of Edgar Froese. I remember getting this when it was new. I think I even did kind of an unpackaging video of it. It was right. I think it was on Halloween actually of whatever year it came out, 2016 I think. Yeah, so you have pieces by Edgar himself from 1983, Meteor, Green Summer Clouds, just from 2007. Edgar and Torsten doing something very much in an older style, though modernized, heavily sequencer based, which was new to me because I didn't realize that in 2007 Edgar, he seemed to have kind of left a lot of that behind for the most part, with the exception of like Machu Picchu. But this was very much kind of a meeting place of music they had done 40 years before and currently. Just beautiful. And you also have a reworking of Tiger, 2013, between Edgar and Torsten. Also Hoshiko Yamane on violin. Real nice version there, kind of adding some depth and color to it. So, yeah, Light Flux. And now we have, actually somewhere in between there was Quantum Key, which was another cup disc, kind of like Malakunia. And this is paired with Quantum Gate. It's kind of a long-awaited album, a posthumous album. Kind of the last collaborations between Edgar and the rest of the group here. Beautiful stuff, going through a variety of textures and moods, and yeah, just beautiful stuff. Yeah, and I love these titles too. Roll the 7 twice, granular blankets. It is time to leave when everyone is dancing. Proton bonfire. Yeah, Genesis of precious thoughts. Yeah, just incredible stuff here. I think I did a video on the LP Quantum Gate when it came out. But, yeah, very much recommended. Still very much have it, that exploratory quality. Oh, and just Quantum Gate by itself here. Yeah, 2017 on the Eastgate. It's a label they had been on for quite some time. It's Edgar's own label. And finally here for the proper standalone studio albums I have here. Recurring Dreams. I think it's just about the most recent thing from the 3 remaining core members of the group. Yeah, Torsten, Hoshiko, and Ulrich, where they're covering earlier Tangerine Dream music overall, giving their own spin on it. Yeah, you have Sequence C, which came from Phaedra, Monolite. This came from Encore, Tangram, excerpt of Tangram, Horizon from the Poland concert, Phaedra 2014, and everything. What's interesting about this too is that each member, I think all these songs aren't played by the group itself, but each member of the group at different points does their own version of, covers their own version. So Sequence C, you have Hoshiko playing violin, overdubbed and overlaid violin. I think originally it was Peter Baumann doing that on flute, with a little bit of electronics. So a really nice version of that. Probably one of my favorite covers on here. For the most part, they do these pretty, without too much embellishment or elaboration, staying true to the original. I think the main difference being is the technology that's applying today's technology to the earlier pieces. But yeah, they do it, recreate it quite faithfully. It's one I haven't had for very long, being that it's quite new album. So something I still have to listen to more and digest further. But yeah, the story continues, and the evolution of the group continues, and I'll go further into it in a further video. They were doing a thing called Sessions, a series called Sessions, which is a lot of live stuff, harking back to their earliest stuff in a lot of ways. But yeah, I'll do that. That'll be a future video. So that's kind of in between this and what came before. But yeah, Tangerine Dream still moving along and still exploring. So yeah, that's everything for these particular CDs, and yeah, we'll see what comes next. I haven't quite decided exactly how I'm going to frame it the next few videos, but there'll be more to come. So again, thank you all so much for watching these, and yeah, and again, if I don't know if I mentioned it last time, if you have your own Tangerine Dream in your collection, even just 1 or 2 albums, by all means, maybe make a video of them and give your own perspective. I'd love to hear that. So yeah, hope we're all well, and till the next one. Peace, love, and joy.